Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We're really glad to have you here. And we are going to, I know more families are joining right now. If you're just joining now, Alisa and I were just talking about, we completely understand all the logistics that go into hopping on a 6:30 p.m. Zoom on a Monday night. So we're just really grateful you're here. My name's Katrina Lappin, and tonight I'm here representing the Los Angeles Independent Schools Consortium, or LAIS. We're a group made up of close to 60 independent schools in the Los Angeles area. And our schools represent grades all the way from kindergarten to 12th grade, as well as many of the schools have early childhood or preschools as well. While each school in the consortium is unique and special as an independent school, one of the things that we share is a commitment to increasing access and affordability within independent schools. So on behalf of LAIS, I want to share our gratitude to you all for carving out this time to be with us this evening, and to share gratitude to Alisa Evans for being here tonight. Alisa is the founder of Mission Enrollment, and this was recently designated as a certified B Corp. She spent over 25 years working with independent schools and higher education institutions on programs and tools that are designed to provide every child with an equal opportunity to receive an excellent education. Over 100 independent schools across the U.S. entrust their financial aid processing and support to Mission Enrollment. Alisa is also mom of 2 children, ages 8 and 10, who attend an independent school in Redlands, California, along with her husband, who works for a local hospital. I first met Alisa close to 15 years ago and immediately felt really lucky to get to learn from her. And I know we're all going to be lucky to get to learn from Alisa tonight. I'll turn it over to you, Alisa, and turn myself off here.
Oh, thank you so much, Katrina. And thank you guys so much for joining today. I'm going to quickly pop on I'm going to share my screen real quick and pop up our PowerPoint for tonight. And then we can kind of get rocking and rolling here. Hold on one sec. All right. There we go. All right, so I wanted to first start by saying welcome to all of you on this sort of dreary, drizzly evening. My name is Alisa Evans, as Katrina mentioned, and I run a company called Mission Enrollment. And we've been working with independent schools for many, many, many years. And I'm a parent of 2 independent school kids and have spent a lot of time working with schools in Los Angeles. I'm based physically 75 miles east of Los Angeles. So I am very deeply kind of entrenched in the world that you guys are checking out and learning about. And I'm so appreciative to LAIS for hosting an event such as this, because we were talking earlier, there's just really no opportunity to learn more about the financial aid process of an independent school. It's such a narrow focus of information, and there's no YouTube videos or TikToks about how to do this. And it can be really challenging to approach this and saying, like, do I make enough money? Do I make too much money so I won't qualify for financial aid, but I don't feel like I can afford it? There's a lot of questions that go into families' minds when they're starting to think about their child's educational career. What am I going to put, what school am I going to put my child in? What is the right fit for my family? And I'll be honest, there's nothing more stressful than these 2 things, your financials and your children. And in this process, we're talking to you about both of those things at once. So I truly appreciate you coming here on an evening in the middle of at the beginning of a school week, right after daylight savings time. And so there's a lot going on. And I want to also kind of on behalf of your children, because my children are in 5th grade and 3rd grade, and I have yet to get a really warm thank you for the sacrifice that we make sending our children to an independent education. But I want to tell you that on behalf of your children, thank you for even making this time, thinking about independent education or sending your children to an independent school and really making that commitment. I don't care if you make $60,000 a year or $500,000 a year. This is a sacrifice that parents make to be able to send their children to an independent education. You have lots of choices on what to spend your money on. and making that choice now, sort of early on in your child's life, to make a decision to send them to an independent education is going to be something that pays back dividends. I personally have seen this, but even prior to working at admission enrollment, I used to work for the National Association of Independent Schools, and they're based out of DC. They've been doing tons of research on children and their success, having gone on through independent schools and then off to college, or what they go off into this world, not off to college, but off to be entrepreneurs or starting businesses or working for the Peace Corps. Wherever they go after an independent education, they are very well prepared. They're organized, they're self-minded, self-directed. And I just think you are going to find that as your children go through this process and as you see your children thrive in an independent school, you're going to see the fruits of that effort and that sacrifice really pretty quickly. We certainly found that when our kids started going to independent school. So again, thank you for making this, just even venturing into seeing whether or not an independent school is going to be affordable for you. Can you make it work? And I want to talk about really my big goals for this evening are to give you two kind of major thoughts about this. I want you to walk away with a sense of calmness about this process. It is very, nerve-wracking, especially if you haven't done it before and not sure what it's going to look like. So we want to give you a sense of calmness about the process and what are the things you can do now to get everything ready. What are the documents? What are the deadlines? What are the details? Getting that prepared so when you do sit down and fill out these forms, you do have a sense of calmness about this process. So you're not running around the house saying, oh, wait, we forgot to grab this. Oh, wait, I got to get this. What does this question mean? Why are they asking me that? So if you're approaching it with a sense of calmness, you're going to have a clearer mind about the process. It's going to be a lot easier if you've done some of the pre-work I'm going to recommend. And then I want you to have a sense of clarity around, or clearness really, around the process of completing these forms. What are questions that the different financial aid questions the different financial aid platforms are asking? What is a relevant bit of information? Oh, I've lost my job, or grandma and grandpa live in our house. I want you to know what's a really relevant thing to share and why it's so important to overshare what's happening in your life, because we are so deeply engaged in finding out what happened last year in your taxes, but your taxes are not always a reflection of what's happening right now or what's happening in the next couple of months. And what we're going to talk about next is sort of what are the differences between independent school financial aid and college financial aid, and why are there so many more questions in our world? Well, your children are still living in the home and you're still caring for them on a day-to-day basis. And you're going to be paying for an independent education within a couple of months of filling out these forms. So it's so critically important for us to understand what's happening in your household at this moment in time and what are relevant bits of information for you to share. If you have the best tuba player in the world, or you have an amazing soccer star, those are all wonderful attributes. And of course you want the best school for your child, but on a financial aid application, we're not going to be looking deeply at that stuff, as that doesn't have any real bearing on the financial burdens of the family. So we're going to help you kind of demystify what are really important things to share and what are bits of information that are more admissions related that you could put in your admissions application, but don't really do all that much to the financial application. So we want to make it really streamlined and clear for you. If I've done my job here tonight, I want you to walk away with that sense of calmness, that sense of clarity, and that will give you a sense of confidence when you're going through this process, not only for today and for this application year, but for making this choice. This is a long game choice that you're making as a family. Some of you, it's just a couple of short years, and some of them, it could be 12 to 14-year commitment. And so making sure we help you get there. So talking through what we're looking at here, what is financial aid in the K through 12 world as compared to college financial aid, right? You may have been very comfortable, or you remember filling out those forms, or your parents filling out those forms, or you might even have a college student heading off in this year and you're getting ready to fill out the FAFSA. What is different about the K through 12 applications compared to the college applications is really the goals are a little bit different. In higher ed financial aid, there's very static sort of processes. Everybody fills out the FAFSA, they go through that sort of FAFSA application, and there might be a profile that you have to complete as well. But there's only one form, right? Everybody goes through the FAFSA. And then in our world, everybody goes through, it could be 4, 5, or 6 different applications, because there are different financial aid platforms for the K through 12 world, which are, they're asking similar questions. They're all rendering a very kind of specific thing. What can a family afford to pay, right? That's the most important thing we're trying to come up with. What does a family think they can afford to pay? Why we're asking very detailed questions is that you are going to be paying on these within, 6 months of completing this form, which is a really important piece of the puzzle. In higher ed, they're trying to figure out what is a relative capacity to pay for you as a family, but not for right this minute. Your application, and they say family can afford to pay this much money for college for this year. You're not paying on that for the most part until 6 months after the child graduates from college. And so to be super precise about what you can afford to pay right at this moment isn't as relevant. So you're not going to get detailed questions about, is grandma and grandpa living in the household? What are you spending on gas and groceries today? Or right now in this moment in time? Did you experience a death in the family? Is mom and dad getting separated and divorced? There's some really specific questions because we need to be able to figure out what you can afford to pay right now. And you're going to be going right into repayment. And essentially, you're going to have to pay what is owed for that year within that year, usually in the form of a 10-month plan, or sometimes some schools offer you eight payment plan or a 10 payment plan. With higher ed, while that's deferred until after graduation, then it's on a 10 or 12 year plan that you're making payments on it. So we don't have to be as precise in higher ed financial aid is basically what I'm getting at. So when you see a lot more questions and say, gosh, this seems like there's so much more you're asking, there is really good reasons for that. We want to get to a very good number so that we can help you set a tone of what's going to be affordable for you, not just for this year. You do apply every year, but we want to make sure we're following you what's reasonable and fair for a family to be able to cover over the course of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 years. And we want to make sure we're keeping pace with you as a family. We're not outpacing your capacity to keep up. The good news is while there are multiple financial aid applications in the K through 12 world, the application process always lives in the same place on a school's website. So your first task of the night is going to be this. I want you to go ahead and get a piece of paper and think about and do a very little kind of simple matrix. What are the schools that we're considering for our children? Maybe you have more than one child that's considering an independent school. What are the schools that we're considering? You're going to go to their website and you're going to go to the admissions tab and you're going to look for some very specific things. What is the platform they're using? Because, there are multiple platforms. So you might have to fill out this form more than once. What are the platforms that the school is using? And what are the deadline dates? That's also something that's not sort of a universal, March 1, the FAFSA is due for every family applying for, that situation. It is different in each school. So you need to make sure what are the deadline dates for the school that you're considering. So, putting together a simple matrix that says, here's the schools we're looking at, here are the deadline dates, and here's the financial aid platform that they're using. And I would say one more column would be, what documents are they requiring from me? Most schools are going to be requiring out of the gates the prior year tax returns, which is pretty universal, but some schools might want a last paycheck stub. And other schools might be looking at your W-2 from 2022 potentially at some point. So just making sure you know that it's not just one form, one thing. There could be some variances, and deadlines are so critically important that I want you to pay deep attention to the deadline date so that you don't miss out because you just thought, oh, well, this person's deadline's this date, so it should be the same for everybody. It's not going to be the same for everyone because different schools do their budgeting and do their financial aid process in, kind of roughly around the same time, but not always universally. So do that work, pick a weekend as you're sitting down thinking about the schools that you're considering, just going to those websites so you know where to go, and we're going to talk through exactly how you get to those details, going to the where, getting that written down, and then now you have your plan in place and making sure you put together your timeline as a family. If you know that most of those deadlines need to get done by, say it's January 5th or something, whatever the date is, making sure that, a couple of weeks before then, you're going to sit down and do the things that you need to do, which is gather the prior year tax returns. Maybe they're, in a closet somewhere. These are last year's taxes, so who knows where they could be at this point. Getting your tax returns pulled together, getting your budgets pulled together, and then picking a weekend. And I always say, get a big cup of coffee, pick a weekend and sit down and just get those applications done. Once you've done your budgets and things like that, it'll be so much easier if you've got your timeline set in place, and don't wait till the last minute to get these applications in. While there is no prize for doing it early, there is certainly no benefit to waiting to the last minute either. It just creates stress and anxiety. And in this day and age, one thing families don't need is any more stress or any more anxiety about a process. And because if you're a new family and you're going through the admissions process, this is a simultaneous process. So you don't wait until you find out what school your child got into to then say, oh, actually, I need financial aid. It's a process you do in tandem. So as you're applying for admissions, you're also completing your financial aid application. So there's a lot that you have to do for admissions. And so making sure you just get this one thing out of the way, that's going to help save you a lot of effort and pain. So we're going to get you right rocking in through that. So I want to demystify a couple of things. One of the big things is, what is financial aid in the K through 12 when we use a term called grant? What does that actually mean? And so if your only frame of reference is higher education, you would say, okay, I know that there were things like merit scholarships or because, and there's work study and all these other things. In our world, in the K through 12, what we're going to be talking about tonight is a grant that comes from the school, and it's based on the family's demonstrated financial need, which means the tuition of the school minus what the family can afford to pay, using a mathematical equation that says we think the family can afford to pay X amount of dollars. What's left over is what is then covered by a grant, so that covers the full tuition. And so the grant, depending on the school, there's different varying degrees of how much a school can cover, but it is something that is granted from the school directly. It doesn't come from the federal government. It is a school-specific program. And so what makes it really cool is that independent schools are kind of amazing at that they are not part of the federal government. And that means, I always say independent schools are, all for one and one for all, meaning we are independent of any third-party support, meaning the government is not funding the financial aid program that's run by the school. It's actually fundraised. A lot of schools have to fundraise for these programs, and so they do them in the form of what's called like an annual gala, or they'll do an auction. And so when you get into the independent school world, you'll realize that what makes us great is that we can come up with our own programs, and we can do some really unique stuff for the kids. But because we're not getting funding, the funding does come from within. And so money that's been raised for financial aid for this year were from families that kind of came before you. And so as someone that doesn't work at a school specifically, I work with schools. You have your, you're gonna want to be thinking about, once your kids go off into the world and they become these amazing humans and they do great stuff, they don't really ever think about being philanthropic to where they went to third grade, perhaps, right? It's just not something that's kind of on top of mind. You think about being philanthropic in different ways and giving money to different groups, but money that comes into the programs will help to be able to offer financial aid for children in the future. So when your kids go off into the world and they do these amazing things, having them donate back to where they went to high school, where they went to elementary school, will help fill those coffers up so that children for years behind you can go off and go on to these independent schools and have financial aid for them. So something that is also really important is it's not something that you're required to pay back. So be sort of suggesting that, once your kids go off into the world, they can donate back to the school. That's wonderful, but it's not something you're required to pay back. It's not in the form of a loan. And so again, it is self-funded and self-raised. So we want families to utilize it if they need it, and take advantage of that if it's available to them. And that'll be something that they don't have to worry about as a loan or something that they're required to pay back. So how do we get where we need to go? So when we have our piece of paper, right, we're gonna have our kids' names, the schools you're considering, and then the first stop on any tour of a school's website is going to be the admissions tab. So when you go to the admissions tab, you're going to find very closely aligned under the admissions tab, either tuition and fees, which you obviously want to check out what the tuition is, but financial aid or affording, insert school name. You'll find them very close together. So obviously the tuition and the financial aid kind of try to live close together, because if you see the tuition and you think, gosh, I'm not sure if I can make it work, your next question is going to be, all right, well, what's the financial aid process look like for me? So you'll be able to find on every school's website under their admissions tab information about the admissions process, as well as information generally about the financial aid process. So the total cost of enrollment is something I always want parents to take note of. And while you might not be paying the full tuition if you get financial aid, there are things that are not generally included in the tuition that you want to be thinking about. Some of it might be covered by supplemental support from the school, but not everything. And so when you're thinking about your budgets, we're back into the day and age where potentially kids can go on trips again, which is kind of wonderful. And now that COVID is sort of winding down in some ways, there are trips like my son's school, they go off to camp. They do a camping trip, and that costs us $500. Well, I got to bake that into my budget. And so knowing kind of in advance the things I need to be paying attention to. So what is the tuition at the school? Are there going to be any fees that they're associated with new enrollment fees or book buying fees, or if there's a school that uses uniforms, are there any trips I need to be paying attention to, testing, things like that. Start just to make note of these costs so that you're aware and you're not taken aback when you think, oh, well, tuition is it, right? No, tuition covers the enrollment, but there are other pieces of the puzzle that you want to be aware of. So that as you're coming into this, you've got a full kind of understanding of those costs associated with the school. And like I said, there's not just the FAFSA, right, which is just a one-shot thing and everybody goes down the same tube when you're off in college. In the K through 12 world, there are several different financial aid platforms, and there's not, it's not that one is better or worse. They are all doing the same thing. The goal of a financial aid platform is simply to take the data in that you're filling out. What is your income? What are your assets, debts, all those things. And then they're coming through with, what do we think is fair and reasonable for a parent to contribute to their child's independent education? Some schools are using Blackbaud because they use Blackbaud for their billing and tuition solution. So it becomes a convenience factor. There are schools that are using a company called Clarity. Clarity has an online application that's, mobile ready. And they're a newer system and they have sort of tax, automatic tax verification coming through. Schools use FAST, which is a different system that does a lot of budget-based analysis. And then there's FACTS and there's SSS and there's TADS. They're all doing the same thing, which is coming up with a reasonable amount of money for families to contribute. They all look for taxes. They're all, and the schools are kind of using them in that same way. So what you want to pay attention to, because it is not universal, it's not like all of Los Angeles uses SSS or all of Los Angeles uses FAST. Different schools are using different systems. So please make note of the systems, because if you have two children and two of the schools that you're looking at use SSS and two of the schools that you're looking at are using FAST and one is using Clarity, that will let you know you're going to get pretty good at filling out these forms, because you're going to have to fill it out 3 times, right? Now, once your child gets into a school, then the schools are probably going to be using the same system, kind of over the years. Every once in a while they'll change systems. But for the most part, once you're into a school, then you're going to fill out that same form every year and you'll get used to filling out that form. It's really in that first year where you're applying to multiple schools that you might be filling out this form a couple of different times. And then you want to pay deep attention to what is the process, meaning what is the process that you're going to go through for that school? What are the documents and what are the deadlines that they're requiring? So I just thought I'd show you just sort of a lay of the land, right? So in Los Angeles, again, most of the schools have it right under their admissions tab, but I want to just highlight for you where you want to draw your eyes when you're filling out your little cheat sheet on how to, what schools you're going to be considering. So this is just an example from a school on their financial aid page. There's what you're going to be looking for is a timetable, right? By X date, and that's the first thing I'm looking for. What is the deadline date I need to get this thing done by? Okay, so at this school, by January 13th, I need to have this application completed. Okay, what system are they using? Okay, so I'm scanning. All right, they're using the SSS application. Okay, great. What is the school code? Excellent. And then the next thing we want to know is what are the deadline dates for what are the documents that are required? Okay, they're looking for the 2021 documents. They're looking for W-2s and 1099s if you have any. And then they're looking for a less end of year paycheck stub. Great. So you put that into your matrix under the schools that you're considering. And then you want to say, all right, if there might be another deadline if you're a returning family versus a new family. So making sure you're looking at the deadline dates, the required documents, and the financial aid platform. You'll see just kind of from this screenshot, if they're using SSS or they're using FAST or FACTS or TADS, the schools will almost always have a hyperlink that you can click on that will take you to the financial aid application portal. You'll set up an account, you'll log in. If you've used the system previously, even if it's for a different school. So say, for example, you have filled out the SSS previously for a different school and you're moving to upper school and you're at a lower school and you're moving to a high school and you've already completed SSS before, but you haven't completed it for this new school that you're considering. You are still considered a returning family to SSS because you already have a profile with SSS. So you would actually be logging in as a returning person to SSS, but you would be requiring that they now send your application to a new school. That's really important because a lot of families, specifically with SSS, a lot of families will set up a whole new account when they move from one lower school to upper school. But your data has been in the system in SSS for a couple of years, and your taxes will move with you and move forward. So if you've already uploaded your 2021 taxes for a different school, good news is they're in the system, so you don't have to do it again. And so if you are planning for a lower school to upper school transition and you've already completed one of these forms before, log in as a returning person to that form, and then you'll be able to use that data to complete the form for the new school that you're considering and you're adding. The same would go through there's another new school platform called Clarity. The Clarity application, if you have a school that's moving to a new financial aid platform called Clarity, they actually are already pulling over your data as a returning family, and you might be able to just log in using the same user ID that you've used previously. So as you start to complete these forms, if you've already completed them previously, log in as a returning family, and then newly adding the school that you're considering. If you're brand spanking new, you've never filled out any of these forms before, you come in as a brand new family to the form, and you either have to upload your tax forms or they'll require your tax forms, and off you go. All right, so now we know where to go to get the things and all the details about the deadline dates and how to get that dialed in. So that's going to be your first task. Before you complete any of these forms, I am going to recommend that you do a family budget. I know this sounds very simple and silly, but I will use myself as a cautionary tale in that I've been paying for independent school for many years with 2 kids. I'm not sure what we spent our money on previously because we must have had lots of it because we seem to make it work every year. But I know where my money is going. My money goes to Target and to Costco. But when I do my budgets, if I don't really pay attention every couple of 6 months or every year, I think that I am spending about half of what I'm actually spending on groceries, on different expenses. And if I don't do a budget every year, it's just like I have this sense that I'm only spending $600 a month on groceries. And then all of a sudden, since COVID land hit, I've now learned about Instacart, and I'm not sure I ever want to go to the grocery store again. And so, but I spend money on Instacart, I spend way more than when I actually go to the grocery store. So my budget for groceries in my budget, in the fake land of my Excel spreadsheet, suggests that I'm spending this much money, but in reality, I might actually be spending double that. And that was really before even sort of the impacts of inflation and things like that have happened. So by doing a budget now, a lot of the questions on these financial aid applications will ask you things like, what are your average expenses for housing, clothing, food, groceries, things like that? If you are thinking in your mind, you're spending $600 a month on groceries, but you're really spending $1,200 a month, that could make a difference in, as we're looking at this, to come up with what's a reasonable amount for you to pay. If you're underestimating things or overestimating things, it's going to render some wonky numbers in there. So I just threw a website, I threw a link to NerdWallet. They've got some good articles. There's a million different apps out there to help you with budgeting. In fact, there's a new one sort of that a friend of mine is using called, it's like You Need a Budget, YNAB. And it takes you through this whole process of setting up a budget and just sort of monitoring and tracking it. Even if you just do a very simplified annual budget that I just take 2 months of bank statements and I put the categories together. Okay, Target, Costco is almost always groceries and all that stuff. Put together everything into the categories and then looking at what that looks like and say, okay, this is probably really more accurate. This is actually what I'm spending. And then you're going to have a better understanding of what you have left over to contribute to non-public education, to independent schools. And so doing that exercise early and now, it can help you identify, particularly now where we're coming into a time where for the same amount of groceries, we're spending probably a lot more on certain things, but certainly a little bit more on other things. Getting a good handle of what your budget's looking at right now is really important. I also say, as a parent of a 5th grader, that my son loves to sign up for the 7 days free or 1 month free of Discovery Plus and Disney Plus and this plus and that plus. And when I pull my budget every couple of months and I realize that I have been paying for 17 pluses, all these different additional things that I don't need, nobody's using, and my son has now since forgotten about, it's a waste of money for me, particularly where I'm trying to pay attention to this type of stuff. So it's just a good check to make sure you're still spending your money on the things you thought you were spending your money on. So gathering documents, making sure that you pull together your tax returns from last year. So 2021. So for anyone that typically files an extension, the last date to file an extension for last year's taxes, 2021 taxes, was October, I think, 17th this year. So everybody should have at this point their 2021 tax returns and W-2s and business taxes from last year. That's going to be the first kind of baseline thing that all schools are going to want from you. And they're going to want to be looking at what happened in the past to help determine what they think that you can afford to pay in the future. And so if there have been job changes or things have been kind of wildly different, getting that and using that as a document as you complete these forms is going to be really useful. So when you're filling out the form, if you've got the tax returns in front of you and it says, okay, what was your adjusted gross income, or what was your box number 1 of your W-2, having that in front of you, unless you're an accountant and you look at taxes all day, you're like, box number what? I mean, it's not it's not something you do every day. So having the taxes in front of you, and if you say, okay, well, 2021, I didn't earn as much as in 2022. Okay, I'm going to just estimate a little bit higher in what happened in 2022. For some of you, you're going to be completing this before the calendar year is even over. And so we're really just looking for good estimates. Okay, so just do your best using the taxes that you've got. What you don't want to do is be running around the house trying to find questions and answers, but not having the taxes in front of you. And then it becomes super stressful. If you are uploading tax documents into any of these financial aid systems, they're all going to require copies of the tax returns. I would say in about 30% of the applicant folders that we review as a company at Mission Enrollment, someone uploads a password protected document. So how this has happened so frequently is because usually if you're using an accountant, they'll send you a notification saying, hey, we filed your taxes for you. Your password is the first 4 of your social and the last 2 of your zip code or something. You know that number, you fill out that number, then you can open up your tax return on your desktop. And then when you go to upload the tax return into the financial aid platform, you have now since forgotten that this is a password protected document. The minute you try to upload it or do anything with it, the password is on. And so the financial aid platform can't undo that. They can't open up your tax document. And so you think you're done. You think you've uploaded the tax return because you're able to look at it on your computer because you've already released the password, but then they can't open it. So then the school gets it. They can't open the document. So then they're reaching out to you as a parent and saying, okay, I need to be looking at this like yesterday. Please upload a current copy, an unprotected copy of your tax return from 2021. Well, that might be December by the time they're doing all their work in the folders, or January. And by January, your accountants are very busy doing all the stuff that accountants do. And so if you need them to send you an unprotected version of your tax return, doing that now before it gets really crazy for them, they can very quickly unprotect that document, send it to you securely, either through Dropbox or some way, and then you can easily upload it into the system. If you have a school, if you're working with a school that is using Clarity as one of their financial aid platform, you may not be required to upload your tax return, but you will be required to fill out a form 4506C, which is essentially just allowing Clarity to pull the taxes from the IRS directly into your application so that you don't have to upload it. But it requires you to have filed your taxes. So your tax transcript is what they're using. So if you have just filed your taxes, it's going to take a couple of weeks for your tax transcript to be generated from the IRS. So if you are using Clarity, give it a couple of weeks and then your tax transcript should be created. And then Clarity should be able to pull in your tax returns from that. But if you have the address wrong or something is slightly different, they might still require you to upload the tax return. So even if you're going to a school that is only using Clarity and you might not have to do it, make sure you still have that unprotected version of your tax returns, just in case for some reason it doesn't work and you need to get a copy of it. If you're a business owner and you don't do your own taxes, or you're not the guy that's, you're the carpenter and you have a tax person that does your taxes and you don't ever look at them, you might not even have copies in your office. Making sure you have copies of your business taxes, as well as your, profit and loss statements, your balance sheets, things like that, that you'll have in front of you. If you're someone that's not constantly looking at the balance sheet, you might not know what your assets and debts are looking like. And so just making sure you gather all that stuff for one or however many businesses you have, having that stuff in front of you will help you to complete these forms more easily. And it'll be just sort of a look at the number, put it in, and do your estimates as best you can. So just making sure that you've got that all kind of dialed in. So giving this the sort of, what is your timeline for success? My big thing is making the budget first. Really, that is your task. I'm going to task everyone on this call this weekend, your task, get your budget dialed in, because all of the things that come after that become a whole heck of a lot easier when you've done the budget. Because frankly, several of these financial aid applications are going to ask you questions that are related to your budget. And if you've already done this exercise, then you already have the details right there in front of you. Now you've got your taxes, you've got the details of the questions. You can go in and get that application finished much quicker because you've already done that work. So by early fall, which I would say we are definitely in the throes of fall at this point, most of the, if not all of the financial aid applications are open and ready to take your application. There is, again, no prizes for doing it early, and there's certainly no kind of financial benefits for doing it early, but just the sooner you can get the application completed, the better. Just get it off your to-do list. But by certainly early winter, you need to be getting all the documents gathered and getting those applications submitted to the schools. By late winter is when schools are doing their returning families, typically doing their awarding and grants. So by the time you're a returning family, the application deadline tends to be a little bit sooner than for new families. So by next year, you'll be completing this form probably by December or very, very, very early in January, depending on the school's deadline. So returning families, schools are working on their financial aid processes, getting all of those files completed, and then they're doing what's called re-enrollment, which is re-enrolling all the returning kiddos, getting their contract signed, getting everybody kind of dialed in between January and late in February, sometimes as late as maybe early March. But by early spring, and typically with Los Angeles, Katrina, is it March? Are you guys March 10th this year for admissions applications?
That's right. Yes.
March. Oh, I'm so happy. I just did another state and it was like March 11th and I said the 10th. So by March 10th, everybody's kind of has this kind of common deadline when they're going to report out to families what schools you've gotten into. So it's kind of an exciting and nerve-wracking time for families, but making sure you're kind of ready to roll. You've got all your applications in. And by early spring, by March 10th, you're going to know what schools your child got into and roughly what they're going to be asked to be contributing towards their education, right? So by then you're going to kind of know what you're facing. Then you go back to your budget and say, okay, I know I'm going to be asked to pay $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, whatever it is. And I'm going to do a 10-month payment plan. And so that's X amount a month, put that back into your budget. And now you've got your budget organized and planned for the academic year. By the end of the spring, you're going to probably be asked to submit the current tax return. So that would be the ones that you're going to be due in April-ish. So usually by like kind of between February and May, depending on the school, they're going to be looking for those 2022 tax documents. Then you will know your file is complete when those have been finalized. Not everybody requires it, but again, you'll have known because you did your little matrix and you'll know what's going to be required and by when. Get those taxes out the door and get those finalized. Usually most schools by late spring, March, and by, June-ish, probably April, May, June. Yeah, by June, most of you will be starting to make payments towards your payment plan, if you're in a payment plan. And then it's rinse and repeat. And you go through this process every year, starting in the fall. And again, it does get easier every time you complete this process because you're going to be in the groove. You're going to be comfortable filling out these forms. You'll have gone through a season at that point, knowing when things are required. You'll have gotten comfortable with making those monthly payments. You'll gotten comfortable with what the additional expenses might be, commuting cost, all the things. You'll have a full year under your belt by the time you hit this again next year. So the next area we're going to dive into is sort of this clearness or clarity around what are the financial aid systems trying to do? What are they trying to get at? And so as a parent, I want you to be equipped to say, what's really important for me to share is about the fact that my income has changed from last year to this year, or I earn my money this way, but we've had some changes in how I earn my money, or I've had some very extenuating external expenses that are sort of unusual or different or not as common. The most important piece of this puzzle in any financial aid puzzle, in any system that's using this for K through 12, is income coming into the house. So the first thing as an assessor, what I'm looking at is money coming into the house. So that's either through your paycheck, or if you're a business owner, through your money coming into the house from your business, minus expenses going out of the house. So things like that you have no control over. Before we touch anything, you have to pay for taxes. Unfortunately, that's just a part of life. Everybody has to pay their taxes. So you've got taxes that come out of your earnings. You've got housing expense. Everybody's got to pay for housing. Everybody's got to clothe their children. Everybody's got to pay for food. You've got insurance that you have to pay for. You have commuting costs. You have cars. You have all those things that you got to have to do to live in Los Angeles. And you certainly have commuting costs that are baked into that too, right? So everybody's got their expenses. That's the money going out of the house. Then what's left over, assuming you're lucky enough to have stuff left over, what's left over is considered your discretionary income. What that means is that money can be used for things like, more expensive cars, more expensive houses, going to Starbucks every day if you so choose, long-term, going on big vacations, things like that. That's all the money. You have choices about what you spend your money on outside of the things you have no control over. A percentage of that you can contribute to non-public education, because there's certainly a public education option, but for non-public education, you can contribute a percentage of your discretionary income towards non-public education. No one is suggesting that you are never allowed to put money in the bank. You're never allowed to go on vacation. You're not really even allowed to go to Whole Foods to shop. You have to do, that every bit of money that after your income minus those expenses, everything goes to independent education. And that's how the assessment is done. That is not correct. We understand and we want you to be contributing to your retirement. We want you to be obviously living a normal life, but we want you to be contributing what we consider to be fair and equitable towards your child's education. And that's going to mean different things for different people in different income ranges. And that's what the system is trying to accomplish, whether it be clarity or SSS or TADS or FACTS. They are all looking at income coming into the house, expenses going out of the house. Some systems will use more related to budgetary things. They'll get more granular in things like housing, clothing, food, insurance, things like that. And then other systems will simply take a lot of a cost of a living for an area. So in Los Angeles, it's obviously very expensive to live in Los Angeles. So they'll look at the expenses of Los Angeles and account for that for your area. And so both of the systems all the systems are looking at income as the major contributing bucket into what we come up with what a family can afford to pay. But what about assets? What do we do with assets? That sort of becomes the big question a lot of families are asking to me and saying, are you asking me to take out a home equity? No. Are you asking me to liquidate my retirement? No. What we're looking at is there are two families, say you both make $150,000 a year. One family is renting. They have no assets. They have really very little money in the bank, and they're essentially just covering the expenses of their house. Then you've got a family that also makes $150,000, but they've got two rental properties. They've got Apple stock. They've got, lots of money sitting in the bank. They have a different financial strength than the family that does not have that. And so the system says, okay, so for families that have lots of assets, sort of liquid and some illiquid assets, they've got lots of assets. We need to look at that and say, what of this is a reasonable amount to ask them to contribute towards their assessment of capacity to pay. Minus, however, you might have a lot of assets, but you might also have lots of debts, things like student loan debt. You might have medical debts. You might have past business failures, things like that. And so we look at your assets minus your liabilities, those things you owe, and we come up with what's called an asset allocation. And what we're saying is, can you contribute a very small percentage of your assets plus your leftover discretionary income to pay for your child's independent education. We are certainly not asking you to liquidate all of your things. And then if you did that, what would happen next year? You'd have no money left to contribute towards the independent education. So again, we as well as the families are long gaming this process. So we're not asking you to liquidate everything today to pay for your child's education this year, because what about next year and the year after that and the year after that? So we're trying to amortize this over a very long period of time to say what's fair and reasonable is always the guiding post of every school that's looking at your files. And then the third piece that goes into the puzzle of coming up with a capacity to pay is the family members, everyone that lives in the household. So this is an important place for you to overshare. If you have grandma and grandpa living in the household, then, and we don't know about it because we're looking at last year's taxes and they didn't live in the house last year, or you're not claiming them as a dependent, letting us know that, then we can make some adjustments. So if we have two families making $150,000 a year in the same state of affairs, living in Los Angeles, all the things are the same, except it's a family of 4 and a family of 6. That family of 6, their ability to pay the same is going to be less because they're covering more expenses for a larger household size. So those are the pieces sort of in order of the big components that we're looking at. So if your income has changed, you need to let us know. If your assets have changed or things are up or down, you need to let us know. Are there family members living in the household that they're not listed on your tax return? We need to know that. If family members, if you are separated but not officially divorced, we want you to be applying separately because now you're covering 2 households worth of expenses. That's important for us to know. We can't do anything if we don't know it exists. And so the more you share with us, the better equipped as reviewers of your folder. You're all humans, you live in lots of complex ways. We only have tax returns in this application. So the more you can share with us, the better equipped we are to come up with a number that's fair and reasonable. I want to just quickly identify some of the tax forms that you're going to be asked about, and so that you know kind of where to go. So what we always need in any application is going to be your federal tax return, which is called your 1040, and then there's corresponding schedules. Some of you will have what's called a Schedule 1, a Schedule A. You'll have different schedules. It is just best to take the tax return as delivered to you from your accountant or delivered from TurboTax and upload the whole shoot match. Get it all up in there, get all your taxes in there, and then we'll get all the details we need. If you give us 1 page of 1 tax return, that is not going to be enough information for us to know exactly what's happening. We need to be looking at what are your taxes that you paid. We need to account for the taxes that you paid. The reason we also need W-2s, if you're working in the entertainment industry in Los Angeles, and maybe you have 17 W-2s, we need all 17 of those because we want to make sure we're accounting for your state taxes paid. We don't want to count that. We want to make sure the fact that you're not getting that money goes to pay the state. So we want to make sure we're accounting for all of the things that you are listing. And so if you do get multiple W-2s, making sure you upload all of those W-2s. If you are a business owner, you might also be W-2ing yourself as an employee of your own business. We need a copy of your W-2 even as both a business owner and as a W-2'd employee of your own business. The Schedule 1 is really an informative schedule when you're looking at your tax returns. And so if you're filling out the form and you're not sure, do I have a business? Do I, maybe you're not someone that's deeply engaged in what's happening. Is my trust showing up on the schedules? Going to the Schedule 1, it's going to tell you all the bits of information or other forms that the school is going to want. And so from there, we're looking to see, do you have a small business? So you might not think of yourself as a small business owner. If you are, say you work at the school, you're a teacher at the school, and you do tutoring in the summer, and you have a little small business doing tutoring on the side. You are also, not only are you a W-2 employee for the school, but you are a Schedule C small proprietor, a sole proprietor. So, you might not realize that you get other tax forms. And so when we ask a question, do you have another business? And you think, well, no, I work at the school. I do tutoring on the side, but that's not really like a business. But for the tax purposes, it is a business. So going to your tax schedules and seeing how you're organized as a family will help you to know what tax forms and how to complete the application in a way that's going to make sense. If you own a business or you own multiple businesses, you should have what's called a Schedule E. And so you'll be able to see if the question says, do you have rental properties? And you say no, but then you look on your taxes and you see rental properties. Nope. Yep. I do actually have a couple rental properties, making sure you put those on the application. If it's on your tax return, we need to know the details about it so that we can do essentially a matching game to match up all the details. If you are a corporation, you're going to get what's called a Schedule K1. We just like the W-2 folks, we don't just need one Schedule K1, we need all of them. So if you have multiple corporations, if you have a couple of partnerships, we're going to need all of the forms for all of those different organizations. So if you have a fairly complex tax situation, make sure you're doing this process early so you can gather all of those forms. So I'm just going to kind of take you, this is a classic sort of W-2 from last year. The forms and the questions that are going to be useful for you are going to be on here. So when you're in any financial aid application, they're going to ask you what is in box number 1. So box number 1 is where wages, tips, and other compensation is listed. So you're going to see someone that asks you, what is box, put in box number 1, what you see there. And so when you go to your 2021 tax return, or if you're filling this out a little bit later and it's 2022, box number 1 is, as far as we can tell, they haven't changed that yet, is still box number 1. And so when you're filling out this form about what happened in 2022, looking at your last year's taxes, and you might want to estimate up slightly if you think it's gone up a little bit, or just use the number that you see in box number 1. That's going to be where it lives. If they're asking for Social Security tax, so this is just sort of, I would say, a little secret decoder ring for you. So you'll see that their boxes are on the right-hand side. What are the federal taxes that you've paid has been withheld from you? What are the Social Security wages? So you're going to be asked some of these complex questions. I put on here because there's a lot of schools in Los Angeles that do use SSS. I put some of the actual numbers for the corresponding application. But no matter what system you're using, they're going to ask you some of these complex questions. So you're going to get, you're just want to be able to just do a matching game. Having that tax form in front of you when you're filling out these forms, it's going to make that question so much easier to complete. All right. The 1040, which is sort of the baseline your tax return. Now, this has been a recorded webinar, right? So you don't need to be feverishly writing down all of the numbers, but we wanted to give you sort of all of the possible configurations of a tax return and all of where it lives on the tax return to make this easier for you as you're completing these forms. And so I'm not going to dive too deeply into this, but know that this is a recorded webinar. You can come back in, get to this screen, print it off, go and fill out your form, or take a screenshot of it right now, and go and, as you're filling out this form, say, oh, yep, I do have, 4B. Do you have an IRA distribution? Well, you might not know. I mean, maybe you didn't realize that when you, transitioned from one company to the next, you took a distribution perhaps during COVID or what have you. This will help you fill out these forms. We don't presume that you are tax experts, and nor should you presume that you have to be a tax expert. So this is sort of your secret decoder ring for tonight that will help you fill out some of those questions around, do I have a pension or annuity? Do I have, am I paying taxes on that pension or annuity? Am I not, is it taxable, non-taxable? Did I have a capital gain last year or this year? So just making sure you're looking at the forms as you're completing them, it'll make this process a lot easier. So the Schedule 1, like I said, is going to have all those other bits of information. So a common question is, did you receive alimony? And you could say, I know where that lives. That's on the Schedule 1. And then, did you have business income, even if it was just a little small side project that you did and you got paid as a small business owner? You're going to see those numbers starting to show up on that Schedule 1, line number 3, so as you're completing this, just take your time, go through this process. During COVID, a lot of folks started small businesses, people changed businesses. And so just making sure that whatever is sort of reflective of your current state of affairs, making sure that matches and then pulling that data through. If you did get unemployment in 2021 and now it's 2022 and you're not on unemployment anymore, you're back to work, everything is fine, then you're not going to put anything for unemployment because you didn't get any unemployment in 2022, even though you're going to show that maybe you had some in 2021. So not everything is going to be a direct last year is the same as this year, but everything will be roughly the same if things have been sort of kind of mostly the same. Well, what if it's changed? What if it's different now? And so the big one is if your income is different, looking at your last paycheck stub can be a really good way to help you estimate income for 2022, because you won't have your W-2s until well into probably by February. So if you're trying to do this a little bit sooner, using your last paycheck stub or even one from December or even late November is a pretty good indication of what your annual earnings will look like. If you own a business and things have been wildly different, using profit and loss statements year to date as a benchmark for income, assets, and debts. And that will help you get through what if things have changed. And then just oversharing that information. I cannot stress that enough. The importance of oversharing information. So using your taxes as a guide, itemizing anything that's unusual. Be careful about double counting income if you're a business owner. Making sure that if you are remarried, that you have both of you and your spouse on your application, because regardless of financial support for the child in the house, we are looking at household income, as we talked about earlier, and expenses going out of the house. If we see that someone's remarried, but they've only listed one person on the application, we're going to have to be reaching back out to you and add the spouse and all this stuff, and it takes a lot more time. It creates a traffic jam for the families and for the schools that are trying to review it. And then coming up what do you think you can truly afford to pay? You don't want to put zero. Everybody has to pay something. But put with something that's reasonable and fair. Don't put the full tuition in there. Be reasonable. What does it make sense for you? And now that you've done your budget, what you think you can afford to pay. For separated and divorced parents, we want you, if you are separated but not fully divorced, if you're living in separate households, we want you to be completing these forms separately. So just pay very big attention to that, because again, we're looking at expenses. And if all of a sudden your household is now covering 2 households worth of expenses and we don't know about it, there's nothing we're going to be able to do about it because we didn't know. And so giving us that information is going to make it much easier. We do expect parents to work, but if you are a stay-at-home parent because you are caring for an elderly parent, or you have a disabled child, or you just lost your job, or you just had a baby, those are all exclusions for us doing anything about the fact that you're not working. And so we don't know about it unless you tell us about it. So if you say that you're not working and just telling us the reason why, then we're able to make an assessment and do what we need to do on our end to say, yep, no, they're staying at home because they're caring for an elderly parent. So that, that's part of the process. That's fine. And it is something you will need to apply for each and every year. Now, I joke every year and say this is like speed dating for financial aid, but I wanted to really give you some time. I know it's now almost 7:30, and I want to give you all time to ask questions. So I am happy to hang on for a couple more, for at least 10 minutes. If you need to bounce out, this has been recorded. You're going to have access to it. So don't feel like you have to stick around. You can jump off and what have you, but I'm happy to answer some questions, and I'm going to go to the Q&A. Is there anything else that you wanted to share, Katrina, from a school's perspective that would be different from me as more of a reviewer perspective?
No, this was so helpful, Alisa. And I think the only thing I would add is we at schools really hope that families never feel like they're in this on their own. So we are all here to help. And I get a lot of calls from families where they start by apologizing for taking my time with a question about financial aid. And I want families to know that all of us at my colleagues' schools, that's what we're here for. So call us, ask us the questions. If you're like, oh, I just don't know if I should include this or not, you can call us and ask, and we'll be happy to talk you through that. Alisa, I appreciate your offer to take some questions. Would you like me to share some questions with you so you're not jumping back and forth, or do you have your eye on them?
I'm popping through right now. And I think, the first one I always try to answer, because it's always sort of a universal question, is, what am I going to get? How do I know if I make too much money? Or, to me, that is because there is a 52-page computation manual and a lot of numbers that go into what does a family afford to pay. And like they said, a family of 6 versus a family of 4 can show very different things for those other expenses that are not based they're just different, right? And there's so much of sort of it depends. My question always back to you is this. If you feel like you cannot make the full tuition work, not just for this year, but for the next umpteen years, then you should apply for financial aid. either you are going to get financial aid, or if you don't qualify, they will say you don't qualify. But if you don't think you can make it work, then you complete the form, you give us all the details, and then, and we'll look at it and we'll do our best to come up with something that makes sense for everybody. But don't just assume you won't get it, and then don't assume you will get it, because it really just, there's a lot that goes into the calculations. But I don't want to discourage anybody from just saying, well, I probably make too much money, or I'm never going to get anything. It's really worth the effort to complete this form. If you want to be in an independent school, and I promise you, you do, it's worth filling out this form, going through this process. The schools are very reasonable. They understand where you're coming from, and they will do their best to accommodate as many families as they possibly can. Not every school can even offer as much as other schools. So don't be surprised that, one school might be only able to offer up to 50% support because their tuition is very low. So they don't have a lot of extra money. But then another school might be able to do up to 60 or 80% of the tuition. It really just depends on the budget and what the family's capacity to pay is. And so don't make any assumptions about that. If you want to be in this world, filling out the form is going to be worth your efforts. Absolutely. So that was a couple of people have sort of had questions about, like, well, how do I know? Or, things like that. So another one is about sort of, as we're coming out of COVID, there's a couple sort of related to kind of COVID-ish. Like if 2021 was sort of a terrible year for us, and then 2022 is slightly different, or a lot different, or totally different, and so maybe it's good or bad, giving us that information in your application is going to be critically important. So what a school will do is, if they see that you have said 2022 was a terrible year for us, and then we made $50,000, and I'm looking at your tax returns from 2021, and it shows that you made $300,000. I'm not going to all of a sudden just be like, oh, you must have made a mistake. The schools will be looking at that, and what they likely will do is say, it looks like something is very different here. Why don't we get a current paycheck stub? Or why don't we get, your last, your W-2, or can you just give me a little bit more information? So the more you can share when things have changed, it'll trigger the schools to understand that something is different, and they will be able to look at that. Even, if all of a sudden you just lost your job, mid-school year, there are reasons families have to come back to the school that something has changed, and schools want to make sure that they can support families even during, in case of an emergency too. So they do their best to try to get the numbers as precise as possible, but things change in people's lives, and schools will be there to support you. But just make sure you're overly communicating. If last year looks very different than this year, like, some people's situations it did, just making sure you overshare that, you give a lot of details around it.
Alisa, on that note, there was a question around how to over communicate and how to share this information, if there's a standard way that schools like to get the information that's not reflected by the numbers.
That's a great question. So the good news is, every financial aid application, at the end of the application, so today we were more diving deeply into the process and the protocols and things like that. Every financial aid platform has a section either in line with income comments, expenses comments. Where there is a place for you to put numbers, there is almost always a place for you to put a comment. But even if a system is not even as sophisticated as that, every system at the end of the application, it's usually called other considerations. Essentially, short of your DNA, we've asked you everything here. What else do you need to share with us? And usually that it's an open text space for you to give the additional information. If and every application has that at the end. You can say, I want to just also share that this is the situation. Like in Facts or in Fast, they say, is your income changing? And you can even state why. And so sometimes you're more directly asked, is something changing? And then it identifies it and notifies the school person. But if something changes after you've submitted your application, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I have something new to share, I've already submitted my application, then at that point, I would say it's okay and appropriate for you to send a message to the school and say, I just want to, and they might be so busy that they can't kind of deeply respond, but just letting them know. And then you might say, do you want me to go back into the application and update it? Or do you want me to just tell you kind of, I'm just giving you the details, is this sufficient? And the school might say, yeah, you know what, I haven't even gotten to your application yet. go back in and update that in your notes. And then when I download it, I can see what kind of the updates that have happened. So you will always have an opportunity to put more than just numbers. There's always an opportunity for text and to free form.
Can I pop another question over to you, Alyssa? There's a couple questions asking about, is it possible to have too low of an income to be considered for financial aid? A couple different people asked that. And then someone asked about kind of in another experience, if you have a really high income, but have really high medical expenses, loans, things like that, how those expenses are weighted.
Yeah, and so is there too high of an amount that a school can cover? Meaning, say you make very low income, and there are some schools that families are paying $200, $500, or nothing, depending on really the level of budget for the school. There's not a lot of families that schools are able to make that type of a commitment to and to support, but there is never too low of an income that say, oh, we don't care about you. In fact, that was what financial aid was built for, because those families could be the next Bill Gates, they could be the next who knows who in our community. And we want kids that are mission appropriate, regardless of their family's income or capacity to pay. We want you to be able to feel welcome and supported. And so not only is there no low income that's too low, there is actually a pretty sizable amount of support that's built around families of highest need that says, you might actually need help with busing, and you might actually need help with food and breakfast and things like that. So it's called supplemental support. And so on the lowest end of the spectrum, schools don't want to say, well, we'll cover your tuition, but it's going to cost you $100 a day to drive here or commute here or what have you, or that you got to send your child to aftercare. Oh, sorry, we don't cover that. That's not what the schools are looking to do. If they are able to support you, they want to support you fully in that way. So no, there is no low income too low. Not every school has the budget to support that, but there absolutely are many schools that do the best they can to support you. On the high end of the spectrum, if you have high income, but you have high medical debts, or you have, massive student loan debt, things like that, that all gets taken into account. We're looking at all of that. And you want to just be really clear about what your expenses are related to that. You'll have done that work already if you do the budgeting. Doing your budgets that'll flesh all of that out for you. And if you say, don't be afraid to say, I have out-of-pocket expenses related to a child going to occupational therapy. I have a child that has needs beyond the normal covered by insurance, and I have out-of-pocket expenses. We don't, as schools, we are not going to know what your expenses are out of pocket. You need to be able to share that. And there are spots in every application for those types of expenses. So yes, all of that gets into consideration for this process. Let's see. Yeah, always a tough one are families in transition, right? So we have a question from a family that has a business that unfortunately, and I'm so sorry, their business is closed, right? So this is the world we lived in with COVID, and that families had restaurants that were thriving and doing wonderful. And especially in Los Angeles, nobody anticipated the entertainment industry just to literally come to a screeching halt, right? And it did. And people that never had lost their job in their lives, all of a sudden are losing jobs and things like that. So what do you do if all of a sudden right now you're in transition? So maybe even 2022, everything was fine up until this moment. Last year's taxes, up until this moment, everything looked normal, but now something has changed. When you're completing the form, just be super clear about that. And likely the school is going to ask for some sort of verification of that. So it could be something like, just maybe an explanation of if it's a business that's closed, we've closed our doors, just kind of notifications around that. If you've lost your job, you usually get a notification of unemployment benefits, things like that. So if you are in transition and quite literally something has changed, you will probably be asked to submit something other than old tax returns, because at this point, it's now almost not as relevant to look at last year if this year is so wildly different. So do your best when estimating. The hope would be you'd come back in action in a couple of months, but that might not always be the case. And so just using a rough estimate and just being super transparent with your school folks to let them know you're in transition. Again, this is why we have you do this form every year, because you might be in a bad spot this year, but next year you get back to work, everything's good. what will happen is that they'll ask you to contribute a little bit more the next year because now your income is back at a stable point. So we're always trying to kind of mirror where your life is in respect of capacity to pay. What do you think is a
Alyssa,
good one?
I was
don't
going
know.
to ask, do you have time for one last question?
I do. Yeah, let's
Okay.
do one more and then we can get people back to their lives and dinner and tubby time and all the things.
Do you have your eye on any? There are so many great questions in here. It's really hard to choose an
I
ending
think,
question.
the good news is most of also these financial aid platforms also offer like a family night on how to complete their specific platform. So, be on the lookout for your financial aid platform that you're using. So if you're using Clarity, they do parent nights. They're doing like parent webinars on like how to log in and go through each of these different questions and stuff. Don't be afraid. That's the other thing is, don't be afraid to ask these questions of the financial aid platforms. Like while I'm an expert in all of them, they are also experts of their own system. And so they have call centers. If you have a question, you don't know like how that works, reach out to them. Let's see here.
There were a couple questions that came up around applying for siblings. So if you have, if you're doing your first application for admissions and financial aid and you have a younger sibling as well, who you'll also be applying for in a year or two, how families can think about planning for multiple tuitions and how financial aid is factored in there.
Yeah, that's actually a great point on two ways. And I think this is important for family planning when you're planning for tuition. And the assumption is, and this is a good assumption, whatever school says, okay, we think you could afford to pay $12,000 and your life is mostly similar. I mean, we're longer the days where all of a sudden people are getting 10% increases in their pay every year. That's not happening, right? If you come into a school and you're paying $10,000, you have one child in the tuition charging school, it's not going to be next year like, oh, just kidding. Now you got to pay $20,000 and your income is the same. What you need to pay attention to related to siblings is that the financial aid systems are coming up with a family capacity to pay. So as a family, if we have determined that you can afford to pay $10,000 towards non-public education, then if you have two children, we're not going to say, well, now we think you can do 20. That's not how this works. They've still determined as a household, you can likely pay around $10,000, but now you have two children in tuition charging schools. So the system might say $5,000 for this kid, $5,000 for this kid. It's not going to double. Like if you're paying 10, then the assumption is you pay 20. But when you have more children that come into the independent school, that capacity to pay doesn't change all that month, but the distribution of how you're paying it might slightly vary. It also works in the reverse. So if you have a child you have two children in tuition charging schools, the system says you can afford to pay $10,000, you're paying $5,000 a child, very simple numbers. And then that other child is no longer in an independent school. So now you only are back to having one child in an independent school or in a non-public education, then you're going to be paying that $10,000 for that one child. So there have been times when families had two kids in independent school, and then one kid goes back off to public school and they are like, well, I'm still only going to pay that $5,000, right? No, it's what you can pay for non-public education. So that kind of then gets allocated to the one child. So it works both ways. So as you're planning, and again, we in independent schools also consider children in college and in undergraduate school to be in non-public education. And so we do consider them as children in tuition charging schools. And most schools will also consider children in preschools in an outside of the home preschool. So it's both ends of the spectrum.
Thank you so much, Alisa. This has been such a helpful evening. And I hope that all of you who joined us today, that this has been helpful too. I want to again just underscore how much we appreciate the time that you're taking to think about financial aid and affordability in independent schools. We're really honored. I'm speaking on behalf of the LA Independent Schools Consortium. I know we're all really honored that your families are considering our independent schools here. I want to highlight a couple of upcoming events that are other LAIS webinars. We have a kindergarten kind of roadmap to kindergarten admissions on November 15th at 6 p.m. And on December 8th, we have kind of a general look at independent school admissions. So even if you're already well on your way in this process, if you have friends who you want to share that information with, it's all on the LAIS website. again, thank you for joining us. As Alisa said, there will be a recording, and thank you, Alisa.
Thank you guys so much. And again, on behalf of your children, because I am still waiting for the day for my 5th grader to thank me for the sacrifices we've all made, but you are making a big sacrifice. And I do truly appreciate your time tonight. And as a parent that's been in independent schools now for, almost now 10 years, we are so happy with the opportunities that we've been given, and you will not be disappointed with really any of the schools in the LAIS group. You have really amazing opportunities. Find the right fit for your kid, find that fit first, then we'll, do your budgets and do financial aid. Don't let the tuition be the reason you don't consider it. It is really a great opportunity, and we will, many schools can make it work. Families can make it work. I wish you all the best for the next couple of months of this year we have left, and I wish you the best in your admissions process. Thanks, guys. Have a good night. Bye now.
Good night.